High school physics education faces a dual crisis. Students consistently fail to retain core concepts, and their motivation to engage is actively deteriorating. In 2023, researchers at Universitas Negeri Surabaya designed an intervention targeting these dual metrics, utilizing a traditional Indonesian hopping game called Engklek. This chart plots typical educational effect sizes. A highly successful pedagogical intervention usually yields a Cohen's d effect size between 0.4 and 0.8. The Engklek intervention produced an effect size of 5.20 for conceptual understanding. That massive quantitative leap was generated by a deceptively simple qualitative mechanism: children going outside and playing a localized variation of hopscotch. Deconstructing how this 5.20 effect size occurred reveals specific mechanisms through which culturally situated physical play is shown to consistently outperform standard abstract lecture pedagogy. The researchers utilized a quasi-experimental, non-equivalent control group design. They divided a cohort of 29 high school students into two distinct groups. The control group received standard conventional instruction. This relied heavily on lectures, passive information reception, and theoretical problem-solving on paper. The experimental group received a unique curriculum called the Engklek game ethnoscience-based learning material. Both cohorts were evaluated using identical pre-tests and post-tests designed to measure specific cognitive dimensions, including the ability to summarize, infer, and exemplify. To ensure the validity of the data, the resulting scores were processed through Wilcoxon signed rank tests for non-parametric data and MANOVA multivariate tests. By strictly aligning the test parameters, the study isolated embodied discovery as the single independent variable responsible for any divergence in student outcomes. The curriculum functions by translating textbook formulas directly into physical execution. In Engklek, players must constantly jump between designated squares on a grid. This motion is an applied kinematics exercise. To achieve a parabolic trajectory, students intuitively apply specific repulsive force and initial velocity. Upon landing, they actively manage their center of mass against downward forces, applying counter-torque to maintain rigid body equilibrium on a single foot. The game also involves a gaco, a physical marker that players throw onto the grid. Throwing this marker requires the student to manipulate momentum and impulse, aiming for precise distances and target areas in physical space. The curriculum dictates varying the mass and size of the gaco from light to heavy, prompting students to physically test and observe different types of elastic and inelastic collisions. Edgar Dale established that direct physical simulation yields drastically higher retention rates than passive observation. Engklek forces the student to live the physics problem. Within this curriculum, the game operates as a localized, high-fidelity physics laboratory, relying entirely on the mechanisms of embodied cognition. Physical play alone does not automatically generate scientific literacy. Without structure, a game remains recess. The intervention utilized a discovery learning model. Teachers acted strictly as facilitators, while students were tasked with extracting the physical constants from their own gameplay. They used specialized worksheets requiring them to log observations on repulsive force, jump distance, and mass variations, quantifying their physical movements. These raw observations are then plotted into formal kinematic charts, mapping initial velocity against distance. This explicit recording and graphing process takes intuitive, kinesthetic adjustments and formally translates them into the language of physics. The data confirms that true discovery learning requires both the raw physical stimulus and the strict pedagogical scaffolding to convert play into quantifiable proof. The post-test results reveal exactly how effective this translation was, specifically when looking at the endgain metrics for conceptual understanding. This chart breaks down conceptual growth across cognitive dimensions. The control group demonstrated a moderate overall endgain of 0.378. The experimental group posted an overall endgain of 0.517, significantly outperforming the baseline, with the divergence sharpest in the summarize indicator. Students in the control group struggled to synthesize abstract datasets provided by the instructor. Experimental students were highly capable of summarizing datasets they physically generated. A similar gap appears in the exemplify indicator. When asked to provide real-world examples of rigid body equilibrium, control students had limited references. Experimental students drew immediately on the visceral experience of balancing on one leg. Statistical analysis via the Wilcoxon test confirmed a significance value of less than 0.05, validating this performance gap as mathematically concrete. Embodied discovery provides the visceral context required for students to accurately summarize and exemplify abstract principles. The study also tracked a second variable, student learning motivation. This graph charts motivation levels before and after the lessons. The control group's motivation actively degraded over the course of standard lectures. The experimental group experienced a sharp increase in motivation. The MANOVA test yielded a significance level of 0.003, proving statistically that the increase in conceptual understanding and the spike in motivation were directly linked. The theoretical engine driving this dual increase is left by Gotsky's model of social constructivism. Traditional classroom instruction isolates the learner. The mechanics of a multiplayer game mandate continuous peer-to-peer social interaction. When students argue over a jump distance or the trajectory of a thrown gaco, they are forced to articulate physics concepts out loud and collaboratively correct each other's misconceptions in real time. The observed motivation stems from the high-stakes social collaboration required to solve these tangible physical problems. This entire methodology operates under a pedagogical framework known as ethnoscience, which deliberately bridges cultural wisdom with formal scientific knowledge. Standard STEM curriculums are notoriously sterile and culturally agnostic, often alienating the exact populations they intend to educate. Utilizing familiar, traditional play dismantles the cognitive intimidation that typically prevents students from engaging with complex mathematics. It begins the learning process in a world the student already understands. A Cohen's d effect size of 5.20 is a staggering statistical outlier, and it serves as a mandate to reevaluate instructional design. Effective physics education builds formulas from the ground up through the mechanisms of embodied, culturally situated experience.